Hello. The video that follows sets the stage for automating credit card expense categories in the Excel-PowerQuery checkbook. It demonstrates PowerQuery M code for automated file path recognition in queries and creates the first PowerQuery transforming a credit card CSV file. This initial query will serve as either a source or merge partner for other queries. I hope you'll find it useful.
This is the second video in the Excel-PowerQuery checkbook series, and it lays the groundwork for automatically categorizing credit card expenses. We begin in the categories worksheet, which we've seen in the first video, and we've added two more tables. One for vendors with specific categories that we want to assign to those vendors, and we include every category that we think we might use. These categories can and almost certainly will be adjusted as we buy different things from different vendors, but we assign categories to the vendors. We'll take a quick look at BB number 1 here. We can see that we use that for both household and gifts, and gifts are rare, so the standard gift proportion is 0, but it will bring over the gifts category so we can make an adjustment if in fact we do buy a gift from the BB1 vendor. So let's go ahead and make that a table. We'll go to Home and Format as a Table and use any design. It has headers, and we're going to call that, the table name is going to be TBLCat. And once again, that's our organization, the categories that we want to assign to the organization, and if we want to divide the expenses among multiple categories are in there. And then the other one is for standard names, so different credit cards may describe the same vendor in different ways. The standard names table will allow us to take any of the vendor descriptions of a specific vendor, and we will assign it a standard name, so in our records we'll have the same name for the same vendor regardless of which credit card description was used. So let's go ahead and format that as a table. And that table has headers as well. And we're going to call this one TBL names. So that prepares us for our PowerQuery activity with the automated assignment of vendors and categories. Before we bring the credit card CSV file into PowerQuery, we're going to create a worksheet called Files that will allow us to provide an accurate path even if we move the file to a different computer. So you can see we've got some typing already in here. The reminders, the on-off reminders, was covered in a previous video, but the reminders will allow us to have notifications of bills that we have to pay. And you can check the reminders video for both the formulas and the macro associated with it. Want to concentrate on the file path here in row 3. So let's look at the formula that's in the cell. We can see it starts with the let function, and the let function is a new function for Office 365, which allows us to assign a variable name to a specific formula segment to make the code a little easier to read. So the variable name we've chosen is path, and it represents the cell function and file name for this worksheet, the cell A1 in this worksheet. And then we just take the left of that function, and we want to find the first square bracket because we want to take out the file name, and we subtract 1 for the position of that bracket, and we're left with the file path of this particular file wherever it is in the computer which it is currently residing. So we can see that when we enter it, we have the F drive letter because it's in a flash drive. So that is the path to the file storage location in the computer. And then we're going to add a file name, which we see listed down below, to show dates of the files. I'm going to give this cell a named range. It's going to be FP, which is going to stand for file path. And then we can refer to FP for that particular cell. The next step is to show dates for the files that we will use as we proceed with the checkbook. So we need the Developer tab to create that function. And we'll go to the Visual Basic Editor and insert a module. And then we'll use the file date time function of VBA to get us the date of the file that rests in the computer in that same folder as the file that we're using now, the checkbook file. So we're going to pass a file name to this function, and it's going to return the date of the file. And we're using the FP range name. We're concatenating the file name that we're passing to it. So that's our file date function. We're going to name this thing get date. So that's going to be the module name. And we'll close that, and we'll come down here, and we'll use the get file date. We'll use the file name that is in the file name column, and we'll pass the path name onto it. Let's see what we get. And we see that we have a date for the files that are resting in the same folder as this particular checkbook file. There is an if-error statement here, so that if the function does not find a file, it's going to return file not found. But these files we will need in the checkbook process. CC2 is a credit card file. That's the next file that we're going to use to start assembling the PowerQuery segments that will allow us to automatically put categories in for our credit card purchases, and then the bank statement we'll need when we're going to reconcile the bank statement. We'll leave the next year to archive until we get to the archiving part of the checkbook. We'll begin the credit card assembly with a downloaded CSV file from the credit card statement. Different credit cards may provide slightly different CSV downloads, but they're very similar. But because you have to transform them in PowerQuery, it is necessary to have a series of queries for each credit card. We're going to use credit card 2 as our example. So let's take a look at the credit card 2 CSV file. We start in data, get data from file, from text or CSV, click on the CSV file of interest, and import. This creates our first PowerQuery, and We see a typical credit card CSV file. We're going to transform the data. It's a clean file, and PowerQuery has already made some adjustments for us. It's promoted the headers, which is what we want, but I am going to rename the steps, so I'm right-clicking Personal Preference. You can leave the names that PowerQuery gives you if you wish. And it has also guessed the right data types. Data types are important in PowerQuery, but it's made the right changes or adjustments in the data type, so we'll accept both of them. Just renaming them Personal Preference. Now I do want to separate payments from expenses. And we can see in this particular credit card we have either a charge or a pay, and we're going to use those designations to create a payments column. So we're going to add a column here in the Add Column ribbon. And it's going to be a custom column. And the name of the column is going to be Payments. And we're going to use an if statement. If the type equals pay, then we're going to want the amount. Otherwise, we're going to put in nothing, a null string. And we click OK. And we can see, all right, we have payments, and only in the place where there's a payment do we have a number. And now we just keep the columns we want. So we're going to choose the transaction date, holding the control key down here, the description. I want the amount and the payments. So we're going to remove all the other columns. Home, remove other columns. And that is our first report. Once again, I'd like to rename my steps with my own names. I'm going to call this Add Payment. And then this can just be clean columns. And this is our first query, but I would like to change the order when I make my choices. I didn't really put them in the order I wanted. So the transaction date is first, the description is second, the amount is third, the payments are last. So I'm just moving that. And this query is going to be called CC2 report. Actually, I think I will call this CC2 _ report. Go to the Home tab, close and load to, make it connection only, and now we have our first Power Query. There's one more thing to be done so that the Power Query will recognize file locations if this file is moved to another computer. And we do that in the Power Query code. One thing I did not mention is this table has a name. This particular table is called TBL _ FN for file names. And we're going to use that to create a mechanism for Power Query to follow the right path when it needs a file. So let's go ahead and edit the report. We're going to go to the Advanced Editor and from the Home tab. And we can see we have the file source. That's our FCC2CSV. That's the one we want to make available to Power Query so it can find its own path. And we do that by making some room here underneath the let. And we just need to tell it the correct file path and the correct file name. And we have those from the file worksheet. So I'm just going to put those in here, and we'll try to do a little explanation. We create a variable named FilePath. And it uses the range name FP, and that will get whatever the appropriate file path is for this particular file. And then it needs the file name, and it's going to get that from table FN. Content 1 is the second listing in the file name column, and that's not true. It should be the first listing. So the first listing starts from 0. And then finally, here in the CSV contents, this is where we put the file path and concatenate it to the file name. Now that should work regardless of where the file is moved. Let's hit done. See if we still get what we want. Yes, we do. We have the file path, which goes to F, the file name, which goes to the CC2 CSV, and then the rest of it proceeds as it did before. So we are ready with this. We'll just close and load. Remember, it's a connection only. And we'll pick up with the continuation of automatic credit card categories in the next video.